The knock on the bathroom door came just after midnight, soft at first, then a little louder the second time. I froze with the towel in my hands, water still dripping from my hair as steam filled the small bathroom. My heart beat faster, not because I was afraid, but because something about that moment felt strangely different. "Mom?" My son Ethan called from outside. His voice sounded uneasy. "Are you okay?" I looked toward the door and tried to steady my breathing. "I'm fine," I answered gently. "Why are you awake?" There was a pause before he spoke again. "I heard you crying." The words hit me harder than I expected. For a second, I couldn't answer. I stared at my reflection in the foggy mirror, barely recognizing the tired woman standing there. At 43, I had gotten used to hiding my emotions. After my divorce 3 years earlier, life had become a routine of work, bills, quiet dinners, and pretending everything was under control. Ethan had already been through enough. I never wanted him carrying the weight of my sadness, too. But somehow, tonight he had heard me. "I'm okay," I whispered again, though this time it sounded less convincing. The door remained closed, yet I could almost picture him standing there in the hallway with that worried expression he'd had since childhood. Whenever something felt wrong. Ethan was 22 now, taller than me, calmer than his father ever was, and somehow more emotionally aware than most adults I knew. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said quietly. I closed my eyes. That sentence broke something open, inside me. 10 minutes later, I stepped into the kitchen wearing comfortable pajamas, my damp hair resting over my shoulders. Ethan was leaning against the counter making tea, the warm yellow kitchen light softening the sharp lines of his face. He looked up when I entered, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "I made chamomile," he said. "You always drink it when you can't sleep." I smiled faintly. "You remember everything." He gave a small shrug. "Someone has to." His words carried more meaning than he intended. Or maybe exactly as much meaning as he intended. I sat across from him at the table, while rain tapped gently against the windows. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was familiar, lived in. Ethan had always been the quiet type, but after the divorce, we had become closer in ways I never expected. It wasn't unhealthy or strange. It was simply two lonely people learning how to hold a broken family together. Still lately, something had changed. Not between us exactly, but around us. In the house, in the air. He noticed things more now. The way I forced smiles during phone calls. The way I stared too long out the living room window. The way I avoided talking about relationships entirely. "You miss him sometimes?" Ethan finally asked. I laughed softly under my breath. "Your father?" He nodded. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. "I miss who I thought he was." Ethan looked down at the tea in front of him. "I never understood how someone could leave you so easily." The sadness in his voice surprised me. "Ethan, no, I mean it," he interrupted gently. "You spent years loving everyone else first." I looked away quickly, suddenly emotional again. Hearing kindness after years of emotional distance from my ex-husband felt unfamiliar. Dangerous even. "You sound older every day," I said softly. Maybe I had to grow up fast. That hurt because it was true. The rain outside became heavier, filling the silence between us. Ethan leaned back in his chair and studied me for a second before speaking again. "You should let someone love you again." I blinked in surprise. "Where did that come from?" "I'm serious." I gave a nervous smile. "I think romance left me a long time ago." "No," he said quietly. "I think you buried it." His words lingered in the room. For some reason, I suddenly became aware of everything. The late hour, the dim kitchen light, the warmth of the tea between my hands, the softness in his expression. It wasn't romance. It wasn't inappropriate, but it was intimacy in the purest emotional sense, the kind built through years of surviving pain together. And maybe that was what scared me most. Because emotional closeness can sometimes blur lines in ways people don't expect. Not physical lines, human lines. The boundaries between dependence and comfort, between healing and loneliness. I stood up slowly and carried my mug to the sink. "You should get some sleep," I said. Ethan nodded, but before leaving the kitchen, he stopped beside me. "Mom? You deserve happiness too." Then, he walked away. I stood there long after he disappeared upstairs. The next morning, I tried convincing myself the conversation meant nothing unusual. It was simply a caring son comforting his mother. That should have been the end of it. But throughout the day, his words kept replaying in my mind. "You buried it. You deserve happiness too." That evening, my best friend Claire came over for dinner. She had been trying to drag me back into the world for months. "You need to start dating again," she said, while helping me plate pasta. I laughed. "Why is everyone suddenly obsessed with my love life?" "Because you act like life ended, at 40. Before I could answer, Ethan walked into the kitchen wearing a dark sweater that somehow made him look even older. Claire smiled. "There's the handsome son." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Please don't start." She grinned mischievously before lowering her voice near me. "You know, he worries about you constantly." "I know." "No," Claire said more softly. "I mean really worries." Something about her tone made me uncomfortable. That night, after Claire left, I found myself sitting alone on the porch swing outside while cool air moved through the trees. A few minutes later, the front door opened behind me. Ethan stepped outside holding 2 blankets. "You always forget it gets cold out here," he said. I accepted the blanket quietly as he sat beside me. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then suddenly, he said something that made my chest tighten. "You know that night Dad left," he began softly, staring ahead into the darkness. "I heard you crying in the bathroom then too." I turned toward him slowly. "And I remember thinking," he continued, "that if someone could hurt you that deeply, then they never deserved your love in the first place." My throat tightened. The porch light cast shadows across his face, and for the first time I realized my son wasn't a child anymore. He was a man shaped by every painful moment our family had survived. And sitting there beside him, wrapped in silence and old memories, I suddenly began wondering something I never thought I would. Had our loneliness changed us more than either of us realized? And if it had, what would happen next? The question stayed with me long after that night on the porch. Had our loneliness changed us more than we realized? I hated myself for even thinking it. Ethan was my son. Nothing about the love between us was wrong. But emotions are complicated. When 2 people spend years carrying each other through pain, sometimes comfort becomes dependence before you even notice it. Over the next few days, I tried creating distance without making it obvious. I stayed longer at work, spent more time with Claire, even started going on evening walks alone. Ethan noticed immediately. "You've been avoiding home lately," he said one evening while helping unload groceries. "I've just been busy." He looked at me carefully, like he knew there was more behind my answer. "You don't have to. Pull away from me." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. "I'm not pulling away," I replied softly. "A little." I sighed and placed the grocery bag on the counter. "Ethan, sometimes I think we rely on each other too much." He leaned against the kitchen island quietly. "Is that a bad thing?" "It can be." "Why?" "Because I'm scared," I thought. Scared that loneliness had blurred emotional lines. Scared that after years of feeling unwanted by my ex-husband, simple kindness suddenly felt overwhelming. Scared that Ethan had become the person I turned to for everything, but none of that was his fault. "You're supposed to build your own life," I said carefully. "Friends, relationships, Dreams. I don't want you feeling responsible for me forever. Something flickered in his eyes then. Sadness, maybe. I never felt responsible for you, he said quietly. I stayed close because I wanted to. The room fell silent again. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen and immediately looked away. Who is it? I asked. No one. I raised an eyebrow. That sounded suspicious. For the first time in days, he smiled slightly. It's just a girl from work. Something inside me unexpectedly relaxed. A girl from work? I repeated. And you weren't going to tell me? There's nothing to tell yet, he laughed softly under his breath, shaking his head. Her name was Lily. Over the next few weeks, Ethan mentioned her more often without realizing it. Small things at first. A joke she made, coffee breaks together, a movie recommendation. Every time he talked about her, his expression changed in a way I hadn't seen in years. Lighter, younger, and strangely, hearing about her helped me breathe again. One Saturday afternoon, I was folding laundry when Ethan walked into the room wearing a navy button-up shirt. You look nice, I said casually. He rubbed the back of his neck. Lily asked me to dinner. I smiled before I could stop myself. That's wonderful. You really think so? Of course. For a moment he simply stood there watching me. Then he asked the question I didn't expect. Does it bother you? I looked up from the towel in my hands. Why would it bother me? I don't know. He hesitated. Sometimes it feels like it's always been just us. His honesty hurt in a way I couldn't explain. It won't always be just us, I said gently. That's part of life. He nodded slowly, though he didn't look completely convinced. That night after he left for dinner, the house felt painfully quiet. I wandered from room to room, unsure what to do with myself. For years, Ethan had been the center of my daily life. Not in an unhealthy way, but in the natural way. Families sometimes become emotionally dependent after surviving heartbreak together. Now, sitting alone in the living room, I realized something difficult. I hadn't just been afraid of losing him. Emotionally, I'd been afraid of being alone again. The realization stung. Around 10 that evening, Claire called me. So? She asked immediately. How's the date night? I laughed softly. You mean Ethan's date night? Yes, yours sounds considerably less exciting. I leaned back against the couch cushions. It's strange. What is? Watching him grow up. Claire was quiet for a second before speaking carefully. You know, there's something you need to understand. What? You spent years making Ethan your emotional safe place after the divorce. I know. That doesn't mean anything inappropriate happened. It just means both of you got comfortable surviving together. Her words settled heavily in my chest because they were true. We became each other's stability, I admitted. And now, life is moving forward. I closed my eyes. Maybe that was what the bathroom moment had really been about all along. Not forbidden feelings. Not romance. Just two lonely people clinging too tightly to familiarity because the outside world had hurt them before. When Ethan returned home later that night, he looked happier than I'd seen him in years. How was dinner? I asked carefully. A smile appeared on his face instantly. Good. Just good? He laughed. Really good. I smiled too, genuinely this time. As he started toward the stairs, he suddenly stopped and looked back at me. Mom? Yeah? Thank you. For what? For always loving me enough to let me grow. The emotion in his voice nearly broke me. After he went upstairs, I sat alone for a long time thinking about how easy it is for loneliness to confuse the heart. Not into romance, but into emotional fear. Fear of losing the one person who stayed when everyone else left. But love, real love, sometimes means allowing change. A month later, Ethan officially started dating Lily. The house slowly began changing with it. He spent more evenings out, laughed more often, talked about future plans again. And surprisingly, instead of feeling abandoned, I started feeling free. One evening, Claire dragged me to a small bookstore cafe across town. I almost refused until she pointed toward the counter. "There," she whispered dramatically. A man around my age stood flipping through a novel while waiting for coffee. He had tired eyes and a warm smile that somehow felt familiar. "His name is Daniel," Claire said. "And before you panic, no, I didn't tell him your entire life story." Claire, "Oh, relax, just talk to him." I almost didn't, but somehow, 30 minutes later, Daniel and I were sitting near the cafe window discussing books, bad marriages, and second chances. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in years, and for the first time since my divorce, I didn't feel invisible. That night, after I got home, Ethan was sitting on the couch waiting for me. "You're smiling," he noticed immediately. "Tried hiding it." "Am I?" "Yes." I sat beside him, suddenly emotional. I met someone. Instead of surprise, relief crossed his face. "Good," he said softly. "Good?" He nodded. "You deserve happiness too. Remember?" I laughed through tears then. The same words he'd told me the night outside on the porch. Only now, finally, I understood them correctly. The knock on the bathroom door that night hadn't changed our relationship into something wrong. It had simply forced us to confront the truth. We were both lonely. We were both healing. And eventually, we both needed to let life open new doors instead of hiding behind old pain. As Ethan hugged me before heading upstairs that night, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes love isn't about holding on tighter. Sometimes it's about learning how to let go gently, while still loving each other just as deeply.